Welcome to the show. My name is Charlton with Big C. This is Charlton and Big C Sports coming to you worldwide on the iHeartRadio network, the number one network in the United States of America. And Big C Sports has been voted the number one sports show in the universe. According to Big C and them good old boys from down south, I want to say bienvenidos to all of our listeners in Latin America, also across the pond, in London, England, as well as Paris, France. Also got a lot more Twitter followers. I want to thank people from the Ukraine that are following Big C Sports, and a lot more that we'll bring up next time. But I want to say there's no one I appreciate more than you good old boys down south in the land of the free and the home of the brave. Big C, how's it going for you good old boys?
Well, Charlton, I'm hiding down here in the most southern state down here in the south. I'm down here in Florida.
Oh, Florida, okay.
It's Florida.
Yeah.
But it is wet down here, Charlton. You know, down here in Orlando, everybody says, with all the theme parks, it's the happiest place on earth.
Yeah.
It seems like the wettest place on earth.
The wettest place on earth.
It got dry yet.
Yeah. Well, you could always send some of that water out here to California. We just had the drought declared over, and it's like 104 degrees, and today is a beautiful June 19th, 2017. I want to tell you, everybody was still excited that the Warriors celebration parade already happened because it's too hot to be outside. Over 1 million people getting together with no AC. Big C, are you glad they didn't have that celebration today, Big C? Your thoughts?
Charlton, I think the paramedics would have been overworked if you guys had it out in California today, but I think I might need some paramedics tonight because I'm going to go murder a couple of lobsters and everything.
Yeah, be careful. Those seafood activists down there, they want to make sure they take care of all that fish and lobster down there. But we have a few things to talk about in the world of sports, and everybody's happy that the golf tournament is over. So we'll touch on golf in a little bit, and got somebody named of Kopeka. He's the one who won the record-setting, captured his first major at the U.S. Open. We have some college baseball in the swing of things. You know, them good old boys are swinging the ball for college baseball. Very exciting to watch that. We also have some Major League Baseball to talk about. But we just finished talking a little bit about what's happening with the parade. We're glad it already happened, Big C. Good news for all the fans of Golden State. Durant saying he's willing to sign on through 2017 and 2018. Big C, your thoughts?
Well, Charlton, that's a positive move for the organization. I think most people thought that he would stay with the organization, win or lose a championship. But it was more solidified with them, beating Cleveland 4-1 in that series, Charlton. Him also capturing the MVP. But when you look at the plethora of personal awards that Durant has had throughout his NBA career, Rookie of the Year, most valuable player in the league, Charlton, also now capturing the MVP to go along with a title.
Yeah.
He has completed the cycle that you expect of an NBA player. He's done it all. And now to stay with the organization that is a very solid organization, Charlton, has a great foundation, that if they can keep the core of this team together for the next 3 or 4 years, they'll undoubtedly win at least 2 more titles, Charlton, in the NBA.
And let me ask you that, Big C, when you look at Durant already deciding that, I think what you just said is a very good indication as to why the Golden State Warriors have been in the finals 3 years in a row. Number one, they have an infrastructure that has people play together. He never said he wanted to be the highest paid player in the NBA, even though he's the finals MVP. And ironically, when you think about MVP, Durant's the 2017 finals MVP. Russell Westbrook, his former teammate, he's going to be the league NBA MVP. Now, when you contrast those two players, these two guys had the same opportunity to stay together in Oklahoma City, but they didn't find in the organization that left Seattle what they find in Golden State, Big C. Can you think about the contrast? The two guys that the organization did not fight hard enough to keep together, they have 2 MVPs, one for the league and one for the finals. Your thoughts on how they may feel in Oklahoma City, Big C?
Well, Charlton, it's actually 3 players. You got to realize James Harden left that organization about 4 seasons ago.
That's true.
And so he was the first to depart out of that organization, Charlton. But this Westbrook and Durant relationship reminds me so much of where I am today out in Orlando.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't remember. There was a Shaq-Penny relationship that was quite similar to these two. Anthony Hardaway, who played at the University of Memphis, who was down in Orlando with Shaq, who played at LSU.
Yeah.
These two players were dominant young players in the NBA, Charlton.
Yeah.
They also reached the NBA Finals,
just
as Durant and Westbrook had. So this is something that is not an uncommon scenario when you look at superstars in the NBA, Charlton.
Yeah.
We've seen it before because everyone thought that they would be back. They would be back in the championship. They lost to Elijah Wan and the Houston Rockets. But that scenario continued to separate, and people have forgotten that was one of the great super teams that were broken up. They also had a great scorer, at the number 2, Quinn Robinson, who was a great scorer out of the University of Michigan. So they had a team in place with the personnel that was needed to make a long run. But it came down to personalities. Shaq wanted to be the man. Penny wanted to be the man. Quinn was okay riding the coattail. He was like a Klay Thompson. Okay? So that scenario did not play out. Shaq went on to the L.A. Clippers.
Yep, the Lakers,
3 titles later with he and Kobe Bryant out there. But also that relationship came also where they could no longer coexist. And one of them had to go, and Shaq moved on again, went to Miami, won another title, Charlton. So when people talk about the scenario with the Golden State Warriors, we've seen this. The knowledgeable NBA people have seen this. They just try to make it like Durant is this modern day horrid where, he's turned his back on an organization and turned his back on the city. But this has happened consistently throughout NBA history, Charles.
Yeah, and that's a good point that you bring up, Big C. I do want to say today's segment is sponsored by your Northern California Cadillac Escalade, the standard of the world. And when you go by and test drive yours, tell them that Charlton and Big C sent you. In fact, I went by and I was test driving some Escalades, over the weekend, Big C, and I realized that's a gorgeous car. And it's either do I buy another house, or do I buy Escalade? But obviously it's a gorgeous car. I can see why so many people are driving them. Even Jay-Z and Beyonce had a baby. He pulled up the hospital in the Escalade. They didn't call Uber, Big C. So all you Escalade drivers, maybe there's something that the common person doesn't get to experience, Big C. Your thoughts?
It's a beautiful car. I saw 60 Minutes last week where they had your boy Bruno Mars.
Oh, yeah.
Rolling around in Hawaii in his Escalade. So, it's a commonality to see people in that exclusive Cadillac nowadays, Charlton. It is a beautiful vehicle. It is a glamorous vehicle. And the prestige it presents, it's a bit of Americana. When we look at it. And, it's just like when we talk about sports. We're talking about the basis of American sports and how much it means to society nowadays to be involved. And, to have a bit of America is to have an Escalade parked in your driveway.
And that's definitely true, Big C. And speaking of Escalade, the standard of the world, and you talk about Durant and his decision to stay, I just think it's so ironic. And you also brought up, Harden, how they had 3 guys that were considered by many people, if not the best in the league, even this season, Big C. They were talking about who would be the MVP. It was Durant, it was Westbrook, and it was also Harden. And that just goes to show why Golden State is so great. Everybody has ego, especially in the world of athletics. If you don't have an ego, you're probably not going to play the game. But ego's not enough to win championships. It takes strategy. It takes ownership. And even bringing that up, when you think about one of the guys who's also considered an all-star player, you look at Andre Iguodala. He's talking about exercising his option to see how much money is out there. He already has championships. Obviously, everybody wants money, but if he can get a lot more money, then I think maybe if he's done looking for championships, he's probably not going to get one if he does not stay with Golden State. So your thoughts on him trying to exercise his options too, Big C, your thoughts?
Well, Charlton, you think about Iguodala. He toiled for over a decade in Philadelphia. He had a franchise who went nowhere. And every player wants the opportunity to win a championship, Charlton. He's fortunately had an opportunity 2 of the last 3 years to win 2 championships. And what more can you ask in an illustrious career? Now Iguodala's 35 years old, Charlton. There's not much meat left on the bone for us NBA careers go. When you think about the time frame. Being 35 years old and you got rookies coming into the league at 19 and 20. So that longevity is not on his side. So if he can optimize his income, Charlton, over the next 2, possibly 3 years in the NBA and get that max money that he can get from a team, I don't blame Iguodala. You hate to break up the band like the Blues Brothers said. In their move, get the band back together. But in Iguodala's situation, Charlton, we see where the Warriors have been able to bring in role players that has just helped manifest that organization and that roster that they have. They won't have any problem, attracting a free agent player, Charlton, to come there and play. So for Iguodala, all the best wishes for him. If
Yeah.
he decides to exercise that option financially and seek out another lesser NBA team. But, for a player, we've seen so often where the media wants to hold them to a franchise.
Yeah.
They're obligated to a franchise, and we saw where Oklahoma City left Seattle.
Yeah.
Behind.
Yeah, the whole city.
Why?
They left the whole state.
And then when two players left, they said, hey, how can they leave
Yeah.
the organization?
Yeah. Now, that's a very good point, Big C. They left the whole state. They left the whole region up in the great Northwest. They were the only show in town when it comes to NBA. And then you have to go into another state south to get to the Portland Trailblazers. Now the Portland Trailblazers, they picked up that whole media market up in Seattle, up in the great Northwest, all because one team could not get a stadium they probably could have gotten had they waited another year. And just to finish on that point, Big C.
Well, Charles,
Yeah.
look at the Northwest period.
Yeah.
You had the Vancouver Grizzlies that had left,
Yeah.
a decade ago and went to Memphis.
Yeah.
And then Seattle left.
Yeah.
Now, Vancouver had a brand new arena.
Yeah.
But, they had the problem with eminent domain that they had to fight with Seattle on, saying, you're splitting our television market where we owned all of Canada.
Yeah.
In the Northwest. And now you're here, a 4-hour drive away, and we're sitting between Vancouver and Portland, on either side. So that was always a fight. But,
Yeah.
for the NBA to lose two teams in a region in a decade, and no one is faulting the owners for leaving these regions, Charlton, but everybody wants to get on a player when they leave via free agency.
Big C, that's a very good point. In fact, when you look at the Seattle Seahawks, there was rumbling that they might leave because they could not get a new stadium. And when they finally got the vote to build Quest Field, they only had the vote by 51 to 49. So could you imagine all the success that the Seattle Seahawks have had, Big C? That was about a couple of thousand votes from not happening because they were also willing to leave and relocate from the kingdom that had cement falling down on people, Big C. So obviously they didn't want to have someone fall. They had cement falling the same way fish is falling when people go up there and throw fish around. So congratulations to Kevin Durant and what he did. You just look at all the close calls that have had so many teams not go. You look at the San Francisco Giants, they were not that far from leaving San Francisco and going to Florida. I think they were looking at going to Tampa. And they actually had some Peter McGowan, got some private guys and put together $350 million. And now you have AT&T Park. They've been there since the 2000s, and that's because they had business people that put their heads together and they did what was best for the community, not necessarily what was best for their paycheck, even though it worked out. They made a lot more money since they invested in AT&T Park. Big C, I want to ask you one more thing about the NBA before we cover a few more sports. I look at the trade, and you talk about who's going to make a team great. I have the Celtics and the 76ers. They're also talking about doing a swap, Big C, and now we have some movement happening in that division. Big C, your thoughts?
Well, that has happened, Charles. It's come to fruition that the Celtics and the 76ers have swapped the number 1 and the number 3 picks in the NBA draft that's going to be coming up on Thursday night.
Yeah.
And this is going to be a game changer for the NBA when you look at that, Charlton. That, here it is. Everyone's talked about Folk.
Yeah.
Being the first pick overall in the NBA draft, Charlton going to the Celtics. Now, is he going to go to the 76ers?
Yeah.
Or will they make a deal with somebody else, Charlton? We don't know. That's the mystery of the draft always when teams are making these swaps. Who has the need for what player? And, when you think about the top 3 players in the draft, Charlton,
Yeah.
is there really any difference? It's a matter of personalities when you're talking about making that pick of
Yep.
who you want to take.
Yeah.
I don't see that much of a difference talent-wise in the top 3 players, Hall, Falk, and Ball, coming out in the draft in the top 3 players, Charlton.
Yeah, that's a very good point, Big C. So obviously, no matter where you go, you saw the building blocks for winning a championship, and you brought it up before, Big C. So many people are concerned about who's going to go number 1 from what college team, who's going to trade up to get a number 2 or 3 pick from what college team. We just saw the blueprint for how to win an NBA championship, and you talked about it before. I mean, it wasn't the first one, but Kareem, when he left Milwaukee and went to the Lakers back in the day, we saw how many championships the Lakers won. You also talked about how Shaq even left Orlando. He ended up in Los Angeles. They won several championships. And now you look at Durant. I mean, before Durant, there was LeBron that left Cleveland, went down to Miami. They won a couple of championships, but they were in 3. They won 2, I believe. And then you look at Durant just coming to Oakland. Well, we know if he stays there, and he's saying he will, they'll have a chance to, win back-to-back championships, Big C. So good luck to whoever's going to make a decision. But you're right. So much emphasis is put on what kids coming out of college. I think if you look around the guys with experience, you make a lot better choice for building a team. Big C, your thoughts on that?
Well, Charlton, the last time we saw a number one draft pick make that impact where the team went on and win the NBA title, and that was Tim Duncan.
Yeah.
With the San Antonio Spurs.
Yeah.
Prior to Tim Duncan, Charlton, it was Magic Johnson. So we're talking about two players over a span of a decade that made that impact.
Yeah.
But both of these players, Charlton, were impact players in college. Magic was the only one to spend 1 year. Duncan spent 4 years in college at Wake Forest.
Yeah.
But when we look at the players now, Charlton, that come in, they're a much different brand of player.
Yep.
These are so much elite players that are coming out of college now that they haven't really adhered to the college game, understanding the game taught by the coaches.
Yeah. Yeah.
You even look at Michael Jordan when he came out of North Carolina. It took Michael several years to adjust to the NBA game till he got to that championship level.
Yeah.
So the young players, Charlton, coming out of college now do not have enough dominance in their game, and they don't have enough body of work at the college level to really be totally impactful on the NBA level. Now, you've gone out as a freshman and you've played 35 college games.
Yeah.
That's only a third of an NBA season when you look at it by the time you throw the preseason in, Charlton. And if you're fortunate enough to make it to the playoffs, you're into that 100-game plateau.
Yeah.
So these players don't have that mental preparation nor the physical preparation, Charlton, to toy that 100-game schedule and to be fresh week in and week out. When we looked at the championship series, Charlton, the difference that everybody can see with the Cavaliers is that they were physically drained.
Yep.
They were beat down by the Warriors. I mean, the Warriors were a better team, but they were also a better conditioned team. And the Cavaliers had to spend so much time playing defense. That's where the offense suffered. They had one breakout game where they scored the points, but as you said, Charlton, they wanted that game to go back to Golden State so they can win that championship on their home court in front of their home crowd for the first time. But we saw in every game in the fourth quarter that the Cavaliers lost. You can see the laboring on J.R. Smith, on LeBron James, Kevin Love, Irving. These players were physically tired, Charlton.
Yeah.
And that's what happens to these young players coming out of college. Once you get past that 50, 60-game plateau, they become mentally and physically exhausted.
Well, speaking of that, Big C, I want to say sports is a billion-dollar industry, and boys and girls sports is the foundation to this billion-dollar industry. And when you play sports, you need athletic and event insurance. We go through Ben and Mark. We cover it through Big C Sports on the iHeartRadio network. They all over 50 states in the country, and they can do pro athletes, college athletes, even your high school athletes and your mom and pop soccer leagues. Tweet out to them on the Big C Sports Network on iHeartRadio. Also, if you call them, let them know Charlton and Big C sent you. Big C, I want to bring this up because we talked about golf. And I don't know how you said you're down in Florida. I'm thinking maybe you're down at the Trump Golf Course. Is that where you are at Mar-a-Lago, Big C? You just don't want to say it? I know a lot of times Trump will invite a lot of good old boys down there, so maybe you are at Mar-a-Lago. How does he golf in such heat and humidity, Big C? Your thoughts?
Well, he has to worry about his hair more than anything else. With an umbrella above it the whole time he's playing.
Yeah, that's funny.
But, when we look at the U.S. Open this past weekend, Charlton, and we get a young golfer that no one knew about. He won it there as an amateur.
Yeah.
And he came back with a runaway victory, in his first major tournament. What did it do for golf, Charlton?
Not much.
It just splintered golf even more.
Yeah.
When we look at it, it's become more of an exclusive club than it's ever been.
Yeah.
Because you got to know who somebody is to know who's at a tournament.
Yeah.
This young gentleman, and not to slight him in any kind of way.
Yeah.
But the world didn't know who he was.
No.
He wins the U.S. Open. He gets an exemption for the next 10 years.
Yeah.
But where would he be in the next month? Will he be competitive? And that's what we've seen every tournament this year, Dalton. We haven't seen back-to-back winners. We haven't seen consistency of a guy winning 2 or 3 tournaments this year.
No.
We had 2 of the top 3 players in the world miss the cut.
Yep.
We had Justin Johnson just make the cut after getting over his drunk and salt at the Masters.
Allegedly.
And as we look at golf, what is there to follow in golf, Charlton? I mean, when you look at the leaderboard all weekend, there was nobody
No. When you think.
It wasn't that guy to say, hey, I'm going to put his poster up on my wall.
Yeah.
I'm going to do that. I'm going to follow him from tournament to tournament, regardless of where he is in the world.
Yeah.
So golf is really going to have to reassess itself right now, Dalton. What type of pulse does it have? Does it need to be on a respirator? Do they need to keep a defibrillator close? Because I think that's what golf is going. We've seen a decline in Major League Baseball in America, other than the playoffs in the first 2 or 3 weeks of the Major League Baseball season, Dalton.
Yeah.
I think it's going to get that way with golf. If one of the 4 majors are not being played, you may not have any draw appeal at all, Charlton, within the next couple of years.
Well, you think about it, this guy Brooks, obviously, congratulations to him, shot at 67. And obviously, when you think about golf is marketed, you know how back in the day they would say, the Michael Jordan and the Chicago Bulls. They didn't just say Chicago Bulls. Now it become LeBron James and the Cavaliers, or Shaq and Kobe and the LA Lakers. They always had that Dr. J and the Philadelphia 76ers. Well, now it's become Steph Curry, Durant, and the Golden State Warriors. Well, when you look at golf, they use big names to sell the next program. They use names like Sergio. They use names like, Jim Furyk or Zach Johnson or Jordan Spieth. They'll use those guys. But all of those guys, if you look at Sergio Garcia, he shot a 72 for the tournament. And if you look at, Furyk, he was 72. The number 1 golfer supposedly is Johnson. He shot 74, so he was way off his game, Big C. And when I looked at the grandstands, and I want to see golf do well, but I just saw a lot of disinterested people up, and that's in the United States. It's not like they were over in Europe playing. A lot of people didn't show up. A lot of the grandstands were empty. I wonder how golf is going to address that. I keep saying, and it's just my opinion, Tiger Woods already showed golf what it needs. It needs more diversity to draw in more than just your average crowd that can go see the same guys week after week or tournament after tournament. Big C, does that make any sense?
Well, Charlton, I think golf really cut its own throat when they went after Tiger Woods so viciously. They went after him with so much ferocity. Trying to make him seem like a bad person, Charlton. As they talked about Tiger Woods and they berated him, they talked about golf as a whole. What golf lacked. That's what they did, Charlton. And when they did that to golf, when you tear down the marquee, that's where the problem persisted in golf. If you got a Star Wars movie, but you burn down all the billboards, people stop thinking about Star Wars. And that's what they did about Tiger Woods. They tore down this marquee that was Tiger Woods, that wherever he showed up, fans wanted to be there. He was the show, Charlton.
Definitely was.
When you went to a Chicago game, and Michael Jordan was the show, as you mentioned, Michael Jordan and the Chicago Bulls. That's what you went to see. And when Michael Jordan wasn't with the Bulls any longer, where do people go to the Chicago Bulls to see? There's no marquee.
No marquee guy.
Chicago Bulls. Same with the Los Angeles Lakers, Charlton. Who is the marquee player on the Los Angeles Lakers? You don't have one. You got a lot of young players, but no marquee player. But you spoke about the Cleveland Cavaliers. It's LeBron James and the Cleveland Cavaliers. Well, when you speak about the Golden State Warriors, it's Steph Curry, Kevin Durant, and the Golden State Warriors. And once golf took away its marqueeism, there was no longer a rival. There was always a Tiger field rival. Phil had no rivalry with no one other than Tiger.
No.
Even though he was losing that most of the time, but there was a rival. Golf tore that down because they thought they were getting even with Tiger Woods because he was an African-American man.
And tried to use him.
He was an African-American man, so they said, we're going to bring him back down to earth. We're going to tear him down. Not realizing they were cutting their lifeline to the American viewing audience.
And I agree.
The American viewing audience that was watching golf wasn't African-American, Charles.
No.
It was not 90% African-American. It was 90% Anglo-American that was watching. But they've also now lost 40% of those Anglos that were watching, Charles. And they lost all of the African-Americans. So they're down to nothing. They're down to 50 to 48% of the viewership that they had when Tiger Woods was at his peak. Because they wanted to tear down Tiger Woods as a person. Not realizing that the sponsors relied on Tiger Woods to bring them their viewership, and that viewership brought them larger endorsement money that the PGA doesn't have anymore, Charles.
And Big C, you're right, because he was an international influence, and I like we always say, he was the best golfer in the universe. and they should have tried to protect his legacy as opposed to throwing him under the bus. If you go across the sport in the world of Major League Baseball, a lot of good games on slate tonight. Toronto, and they're going to be at Texas. You have Kansas City. They're playing a game at home versus Boston. Houston, they're going to be at Oakland out here in the Bay Area. Detroit's going to be at Seattle, and that's over in the American League. In the National League, Washington's going to be at Miami. You have San Francisco. They're going to be at the new ballpark down in Atlanta. Pittsburgh, they're at Milwaukee, and they'll be under the dome. San Diego, they're at the Chicago Cubs, last year's Big C World Series champions. The New York Mets, they're at L.A., and then the Dodgers with Kershaw. That's going to be a great game, the Mets and the Dodgers down in Los Angeles. You know, the history those two teams have, Big C. I just want to run down who's in first place right now for Major League Baseball. In the American League, you have New York, they're 38 and 29, followed by Boston at 38 and 30. In the Central, you have Cleveland, they're 36 and 31, followed by Minnesota. They are 34 and 33. Houston in the West playing really good baseball, 46 and 23, and they're right ahead of Texas at 34 and 34. In the National League, you have Washington at 42 and 27. Harper trying to get $400 million. I think that's a be stealing money. New York, they're in second place there at 31 and 37. You have Milwaukee in the Central. They're leading 38 and 33 is their record, followed by Chicago, 34 and 34. And in the West, you have Colorado hitting the baseball very well. They are 46 and 26. They lead the Dodgers that are 44 and 26 on the season. Big C, any of those games you're looking forward to hearing about as we follow baseball into the chase for October? Big C, your thoughts?
Well, Charlton, is quite interesting what Colorado is doing. You know, they have one of the hottest players in baseball that hit from the cycle just the other day. But, you know, for them to be in the top of the division,
yeah,
you know, at this time of the season for the first time in franchise history.
Yeah.
You know, the change of atmosphere when you think about the top teams in the division in Major League Baseball, we've always been accustomed to the regulars.
Yeah.
You know, it's like the Minnesota Twins. You know, they went 3 consecutive seasons where they lost over 100 games. Now they're in first place.
Yeah.
They've changed the landscape of the American League just like the Rockies have changed the landscape of the National League.
Yeah.
The Houston Astros, Charlton, leading their division since going over to the American League.
Yeah.
So baseball is going through sort of a renaissance, but it's going through a renaissance with some new, you know, divisional leaders right now.
Yeah.
And that's good for baseball, Charles, because we always have the consistent teams that have always been there. The Yankees are down just a bit this year.
Yep.
You always need New York to be relative when it comes to baseball. You look at DeGrom last night in New York where he threw a one-hitter.
Yeah.
So he hit a home run. So, you know, the Mets, but they've had so many injuries that, you know, people talked about them potentially being in the World Series.
Yeah.
But with the number of injuries they had, they're not going to be there this year, you know, even if they make the playoffs,
Yeah.
which is a far stretch for them. But baseball is a competitive game. With a couple players, Charlton, it makes the difference in an organization. You get hot bats, and you can go from last to first in a hurry.
Yeah, that can definitely happen in a hurry. So no matter what's going on, baseball's always good. It's so hot out here, it's hard to go out and sit in the sun, Big C, and watch a baseball game. But no matter who you're pulling for, baseball's still exciting, especially as you get to closer to the boys of October. I just want to run down some of the lines from Las Vegas because we know how much you love Las Vegas, Big C. You and your friends and those phone calls you make all the time going back to the Las Vegas in the National League. Well, Washington is favored over Miami. You have the Giants favored over Atlanta. Pittsburgh is favored over Milwaukee. Chicago's favored over San Diego. And L.A., they're favored over New York. In the American League, Cleveland, they're favored over Baltimore. Toronto's favored over Texas. Kansas City is favored over Boston. The A's, there's a slight favorite over Houston, and Seattle, a slight favorite over Detroit, and Tampa's a slight favorite over Cincinnati. Big C, I want to run down something that we've all been talking about, and this will be our segment for today, but we talked about the UFC and Floyd Money Mayweather and Conor McGregor, and we just brought this up not too long ago. People will pay to see anything because, obviously, we love blood sports. Even though we say we don't want to see it, we do want to see it. But we did have a tragedy happening in the world of UFC fighters, and I want to bring this guy's name up. It happened in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. Tim Hague, a former UFC fighter known as the Thrashing Machine, he unfortunately passed away Sunday, 2 days after he was critically injured when he was out. You know, he was kicked out of a boxing match against former Edmonton Eskimos defensive end Adam Braidwood, who's a former CFO player. And then the sister, you know, Jackie Neal, she announced that he has passed and a family statement. The match was Friday night, promoted by KO Boxing. Now, he was only 34 years old. I just want to ask you this question because we talked about it. I just never thought it would happen so soon. At what point will the UFC lose fanfare and the talks of let's have this $150 million payout with McGregor and Floyd Mayweather if unfortunately someone passes away from what happens in the ring? Big C, your thoughts?
They're not going to lose any fanfare. Unfortunately, there's been many lives lost in the ring of contact sports, even in boxing.
Yeah.
You know, and this is one of those incidents, unless it's in a world championship fight, Jonathan, the fans will not even realize that it occurred. You know, it will make the news that week, but unfortunately how American society looks at things, Jonathan,
yeah,
they're only looking at the top of the heap. You know, when you ask somebody who's ranked number 5 in any sport, no one knows.
Yeah.
You know, it's hard to remember who the Super Bowl loser was 5 years ago.
Yeah.
You know, if you ask, people have to do research on that.
Yeah.
So people remember who wins, Jonathan.
Yep.
That's what they look at. Unfortunately, this young man has lost his life. It's always a tragedy when we lose someone in society. But, you know, in the world of sports, it's always the next man up. That's how they look at things.
Yeah.
I mean, we lost players on football gridiron. I remember over a decade ago when Corey Stringer, the offensive tackle from the Minnesota
the Vikings, yeah.
offensive tackle, lost his life in training camp.
Yeah.
You know, it was the next lineman to fill that position.
Yep.
Yet they mourned Corey Stringer, but that season started with a new offensive tackle.
Yeah.
That's how sports is, Charlton. Unfortunately, because as you speak about it, it's $1 billion business.
Yeah.
It's an industry.
Yeah.
The industry is about filling positions, whether it's in boxing, MMA, baseball, basketball. When a player is injured, Charlton, he's replaced as quick as they can get him off the field.
Yeah. Yep, that's true.
That's how sports work. That's the world of sports. When somebody is injured, he's replaced as soon as they've gotten him to the sideline. Before he's gotten to the sideline,
yeah,
his backup, his replacement is in the lineup.
Yeah.
And it doesn't make any difference. The only sport that doesn't happen is in individual sports like boxing and tennis, Jones. They don't have a replacement in those sports.
Yeah.
But in team sports, your position is only good as long as you're healthy.
Yeah. And yeah.
You're gone. I mean, we just went through your buddy Tony Romo.
Yeah.
That everybody cries for an entire season. And Tony should be the starting quarterback in Dallas, even though they were on the verge of having the best record in the team history.
And they messed it up. Yeah, they messed it up. That wasn't good enough.
Also, his career was over just that quick.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
And he went to the broadcast booth. You know, we've seen a plethora of quarterbacks not go back to the playing field. And just in this past season, Tony Romo, Jay Cutler, Colin Kaepernick is still yet to get a job.
Yeah.
So you're only there as long as somebody wants you there in a sport, a team sport.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate this young man has passed away, Charlton, but no sport is leaning on one individual to carry that sport, Charlton. That's the unfortunate thing about this. I remember years ago back in the 90s when Hank Gathers, great young basketball player, Loyola Marymount in Los Angeles, being coached by Paul Westhead.
Yeah.
Passed away on the basketball court.
Yeah, I remember.
On national television on the ESPN game.
Yeah.
Slated the number 1 pick in the draft. I believe it was around 1992, Charlton.
Yeah.
But, you know, he lost his life. But they continued playing on, Charlton, in the tournament.
Yeah.
Loyola played the next game in the tournament.
Yeah.
They were talking about not playing the game. The greatest part about the conference is that the conference forfeited the conference championship to Loyola.
Yeah.
Because nobody could really beat them.
Yeah.
But Loyola went on and won 2 games, the 2 first games they had in the NCAA tournament that year. Matter of fact, they beat Michigan, who was the defending champion, by some 46 points.
Wow.
And so, but they played with a lot of emotion. But it just goes to show, Charlton, teams continue on.
Yeah.
And, you know, with the loss of life, it's never easy for anybody. But in this game of sports, fans as well as management is just looking for the team to perform.
Yeah.
They don't always appreciate the individual.
Well, that's a very good point, Big C. And speaking of team, I want to just throw back one point at you before we close out. I just thought about it as you said it. The Dallas Cowboys were in first place, and they were on the mark of trying to go, you know, home field advantage in the NFL playoffs.
They would have been 14-2 if they had not played Tony Romo.
Now, they played Tony Romo that almost every prognosticator was saying they got to play Tony Romo because he has a lot of football in him. And we were the only ones saying that, no, they don't need to play Tony Romo. And Tony Romo fooled them all so bad, he decided to just give up on football and go into the broadcast booth. I wonder what all the TV prognosticators are thinking now. They were advocating for him more than he was advocating for himself, Big C, against the guy that had the best record in the NFL with their quarterback that they had down there. So, I mean, obviously, I just thought about it as you said it. Here's a guy in the broadcast booth, and everybody on TV was calling for him to be the starting quarterback for the Cowboys, and he decided he didn't even want it, Big C. That's how bad some of these prognosticators are. But, Big C, we've talked about Kevin Durant and what he means to the Golden State Warriors. We talked about Andre Iguodala, what he means, going to test the waters in the free market. We talked about the Celtics and the Sixers. Will they make a trade? And obviously how important it is for guys and teams to get position. We talked a little bit about McGregor and Mayweather, and then ultimately the tragedy with the boxer in the UFC that lost his life. We talked about golf that's also on life support. And I just want to know, what are you looking forward to going into this week, Big C, with all that heat and humidity down there in the South? Big C, your thoughts?
I'm excited about the College World Series that's going on right now in Omaha, Nebraska. These young men play great baseball every year this time of year. Earlier today, Florida State beat Cal State Fullerton. You have the number one team in the nation tonight playing Charleston. In Oregon State, they're playing LSU, ranked number 4 in the nation.
Yeah.
But just great competitive young baseball, Charlton. And this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to get to the stadium, the National Championship Series in Omaha, Nebraska, where it's been played for almost ever. You got the men's series being played in Omaha, Nebraska. You got the women's series being played in Oklahoma City.
Yeah.
And those young ladies play great competitive, baseball also. But I'm excited about the College World Series, men and women both, Charlton, being played in Oklahoma City and Nebraska.
Well, Big C, that is very good news. So we wish everybody success, especially you college players out there competing for a championship. Again, congratulations to Golden State on your championship. And I want to say every Monday through Friday at 5 and 6 p.m. worldwide, follow Big C Sports on the iHeartRadio network, the #1 network in the United States of America. And Big C Sports has been voted the #1 sports show in the universe, according to Big C and them good old boys down south. We want to always take on every program. There is never an excuse for domestic violence. If you know any woman going through that garbage, just call 911, because no one should have to deal with that garbage on their own. And as we always take on every Big C Sports program, we thank you, we appreciate you, and we hope that you have a super fantastic day.